Okay, my name is Grace DeWitt, and I am the National and International Outreach Programs Coordinator at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And I'm really so happy to welcome you to this fourth virtual artist panel in our series of 6 about the exhibition, New Worlds Women to Watch 2024. New Worlds features 28 contemporary artists from across the US and around the world, and the show opens at our museum in Washington, D.C. this coming April. It's been a long time coming and we're really excited. I personally have the pleasure of working with the museum's network of 31 outreach committees. These committees are groups of NMWA members who advance our mission for gender equity in the arts through grassroots programming and audience building in their respective regions. Women to Watch is a unique exhibition series that's designed by NMWA in collaboration with its national and international outreach committees. And my colleague, Aureen Zara, will go over the series in greater detail. Aureen is Associate Curator at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and she, along with Senior Curator Jenny Trainer, is one of the co-curators of New Worlds Women to Watch 2024. It's always a privilege to hear from Maureen and the incredible artists in this show. So as we move forward with today's conversation, please ask your questions at any point using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll have some time to address those questions at the end. Without further ado, I will pass the mic over to Maureen. Thank you.
Thanks, Grace, and happy Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This promises to be a really exciting and inspiring roundtable conversation with 4 of our 28 Women to Watch artists. So as Grace mentioned a little bit about the Women to Watch program and the structure of this exhibition series, I'll just go a little bit more into detail for anyone who may be new or unfamiliar. So the Women to Watch program is really a collaboration with these committees that Grace mentioned, our advocacy groups who really carry out our mission of championing and advocating for artists in their particular region. So for the Women to Watch exhibition, we work with these committees to find first regional curators, consulting curators who really know the contemporary art scene in their region. Those curators then nominate 3 to 5 artists in their region working on a certain theme that we here at NMWA in Washington, D.C. have picked out. So for this time around, our theme is New Worlds. Now, my colleague Jenny Trainer and I, my co-curator for this exhibition, came up with this idea of New Worlds back in 2020 when we were opening our last Women to Watch exhibition called Paper Roots. In 2020, we were going to open Paper Roots, but then the pandemic hit, and we were in this very difficult position where we wanted to be able to celebrate all the Women to Watch artists. We wanted to be able to do what we normally do when we open an exhibition, but obviously we were not able to do so. And so this idea, this frustration of wanting to be in a different time, in a different place, came out of that moment. And we wanted to do a show that kind of focused around this idea that if artists were able to envision a different world than the one that we were currently living in, what would that world look like? And that world maybe re-envisioning the past, rethinking our present, and envisioning a totally different future. So that's really the gist of New Worlds. And when we got all the submissions and we started putting this show together, we saw that there was a lot of synergy between various artists from various regions, countries, and we saw these sort of sub-themes start to come out. And the panel today is called what we're calling Historicisms and Futurisms. And the idea of that is that historicism is the idea that our social and cultural practices, ideas, and beliefs are determined by history, and they can be explained by studying the past. And similarly, for futurism, futurists imagine or speculate alternative futures. So the artists in this panel, SHAN Wallace, Nicki Green, Mona Cliff, April Banks, are 4 artists who think critically about what we know of the past and how that knowledge informs our present, our current systems, and then also future identities. So thank you, first of all, Shan, Nikki, Mona, and April for joining us today. I'm really excited to be in a conversation with you four. And what we'll do is I'll briefly introduce each of you, ask you to speak for a few minutes about your work, and then we'll get into a conversation. I'll ask some questions, and then I'll also take some questions from the audience. So again, to everyone joining in, please feel free as we're talking to put your questions in the chat box below. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share screen. All right, so we'll start with April. So April Banks is representing our Southern California committee, Southern California region. She's an LA-based conceptual artist with local roots in Virginia. So that's great. We have some local connections here. And working across visual arts and social engagement, April positions her practice between image, space, and experience. She has recently been creating incredible works of public art sculpture, such as the steel sculpture titled Elevate. Freedom is a Place, presented by the Nicholson Project in Washington, D.C. from 2022 to 2023. The work in New World called Future Ancient, which is an illuminated glass sculpture, is actually related to that public art project. And so with that very brief introduction, I will hand it over to April to tell us more about her work in the show and her practice overall. Take it away, April.
Good morning, everyone. I am happy to be here to meet the other artists and to share a little bit about my practice. So I'll just jump in. As Oren mentioned, this piece is related to the public art piece that is in Washington, D.C. It has been extended through late spring of this year. So if you're in the D.C. area, you can go by and see it at the Nicholson Project. So my work for the last, I don't know, since 2018 has been working with communities to tell mostly erased histories or those that have been displaced or forgotten, and thinking about how to repair those harms. And in a lot of cases, it ends up being about imagining an alternate history or a possible future. And so I've done a lot of community engagement with students and with community around exactly what that is. Specifically for the Nicholson Project, where this pattern comes from, I thought about architecture in our communities and how we inherit the pattern language that is within the architecture. In this case, the stoop, which is where this pattern comes from, the railing in the stoop. And stoops are common in DC, and we think about the spaces that we inhabit, particularly the stoop, where it's a place of rest. It's this in-between space between the inside and the outside. And what is inscribed, what is written in that ironwork, and where does it come from? Where does that pattern language originate, and who is it for? And so I started asking the question, what if we were creating our own pattern work in our architecture as a way of storytelling about our legacy, our histories, or our families? And so this pattern work is the back railing of the stoop. And then for a show in Los Angeles titled A Dormant Artifact, I wanted to reimagine that pattern work in a different material. So in this is what you're seeing, what will be in the exhibition. It is a glass piece, fused glass, backlit. So it really has quite a different look when it's backlit and when it's not. And also the introduction of color really kind of changed the feel of it versus sunlight and shadow, which is how the other piece exists. As far as the pattern work itself, I was really thinking about a resistance to our, I guess, capitalist definition of time, feeling really exhausted all the time by like deadlines and just like this linear definition of calendars and times, and like, is there another way? And really thinking about how so many other cultures or ancient cultures, think about time in a different way. We have other kinds of time, like CP time and island time and African time. And so I stopped wearing a watch at some point, probably 20 or so years ago, just like feeling so stressed by this, like these increments of time to like justify being productive or efficient. And so I really wanted to think about it as more circular. So then that relates to also like the past and the future all being commingled, and that we exist as, particularly as women, born with all the eggs that we will ever have, which means, uh, a potential girl child will also have all the eggs that she will ever have. And so we possess within us as women like this infinite lineage legacy possibility. And so that's what that central figure represents. And I've also been exploring like a pattern language as another kind of language, because we all know that language is weaponized. English, in particular, is becoming kind of a dominant language, and to the point of all of the beauty and the difference of different languages being lost. And so, like in my work, especially now, I'm considering, in a new world, in an imaginary space, what would another language be, whether it's sonic or pattern related. Um, should I stop there? How am I doing on time?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's funny when you say that, you hear from a lot of people, particularly to women, time is running out, you need to do this or you need to do that. But from what you're saying, that's such a linear way of thinking about time and about our lived experiences, rather than thinking of it in a more sort of cyclical way, or looking back. So that central figure, can you talk a little bit more about what you're drawing your imagery from? You've talked about that central figure being kind of omnidirectional and looking in both directions. And then can you talk a little bit about some of the other imagery that you have in the composition?
Yeah, so this kind of figure is showing up lately in my work. It just is coming out. I think I'm thinking a lot about reciprocity, multiplicity. Um, I'm imagining a new world now for a project that I'm working on where everyone is born a twin. And so I think just this idea of, yeah, responsibility and reciprocity and care, and that we are never, that our actions are never without consequence, and that we can take care of each other in a way that, takes care of all of us, it's beneficial to all of us. So really thinking about, um, not only, so obviously there's profiles embedded in the lower kind of like the torso of that figure, and that is speaking to this idea of, woman being born with all the eggs and all the future, generations legacy if she chooses to have children. And then, a kind of cartography or mapping, obviously, with all the lines. I'm really interested in totemic figures and how so many ancient cultures use totemic figures. And I think it's the same way, another way of telling time, a way of an interconnectedness. Most of these cultures do not think of hierarchy. So it's not that the figure on top is the most important, but it's all about kind of a laddering or a holding of each other. The eye shows up in a lot of my work. And so a lot of the shapes are referencing the eye. Obviously, the one in the center is explicitly an eye. And this idea of, obviously, like tresses and hair, and as a way of taking care of each other, specifically in Black culture. The beauty salon and like having your hair done, your hair braided, is usually done by someone else. Can be done by yourself, but that in itself is a whole culture, a whole act of care. And so I wanted to kind of record that in this as well. it's my first time working in glass, so it was a great experience just thinking about luminosity and what happens when, you know, the light comes from behind.
Yeah, I mean, I know that you've said in other interviews and you've talked about sort of medium being secondary to the concept, right? You consider yourself a conceptual artist, the idea comes first. How then do you decide what medium to work in as you're kind of thinking of, because you've used this kind of imagery, you've used it in the steel sculpture for the public art project in DC, and then this is in glass. So what goes on in your thinking as you're trying to materialize the ideas in your head into this visual art form?
It's partly curiosity about the medium. You know, I'm also now working in clay, also doing kind of inscribing in model scale architecture, pattern work in clay, which will get cast in resin. So I think it kind of just feels like what is right for the site, the location, the history of that place is really important. I like to be in conversation with that. For this, it was a part of an exhibition called A Dormant Artifact. And so this idea of glass being illuminated and jewel-like in particular, what felt like a good response to that exhibition. But yeah, there's so many materials that I'm curious about, and because I'm not trained, um, you know, my education is not does not come from art. I was trained in architecture. I'm not a master of any particular medium, and so I often explore or learn a new medium for a project, and thus the, you know, describing myself as a conceptual artist.
And that keeps you sort of ever learning, you know, working in new mediums, sort of exploring new things. And I think medium is a really good point to then hear from our next artist. If I can move on to the next slide. Yes, Mona Cliff, who is representing our greater Kansas City region, because she has a very different relationship with her primary medium. And so I'll just do a quick intro of Mona. Mona is an enrolled member of the Ani Nation, again, representing our greater Kansas City committee. In her works, she uses traditional art practices like beadwork and fabric applique to signify and celebrate indigenous knowledge systems passed down the generations. So in New Worlds, we have two examples of Mona's exquisite beadwork. One as a wall installation that you see here, conjured topography of beading on wood. And the other as a gas mask, which reflects on the present world as much as it does on looking back or looking ahead to the future. So Mona, do you want to tell us a little bit more about these works and your practice overall?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And it's good to see the other artists. And I'm excited about the upcoming exhibit. I guess to start off with some context about my work is I primarily got my start as learning traditional skills from my grandmother and community members from my spiritual community, but my native community. I grew up in the city in Portland, Oregon, but we also visited my grandparents' reservation quite a bit, and also attended quite a few ceremonies. And so part of my role as the eldest daughter was to make items for my father to use in ceremonial settings. But I also, you know, started falling into my love of art at a young age and attended college. And I was slightly dissatisfied with my art education, even though it was an amazing school. There wasn't much that I knew culturally that I was seeing in what was considered fine art. So I approached my grandmother to teach me how to do beadwork, because much of the ceremonies that we attended and social gatherings, beadwork is a strong identifier of what tribe you come from, your personal connections to certain things about your tribe, or even your spirituality. So I think around 19 is when I started beading. So it's been about 27 years that I've been fully following this traditional crafting mode. In 2007, I had my first child, and really kind of delve more into traditional skills and culture bearing, it's called. And then right around when they got older, so 2018, when I kind of knew that my kids could like be self-sufficient after 3 kids, I really wanted to revisit my contemporary practice, and I had more confidence to bring these materials with me, because I needed to, what I started to understand about myself was this idea of generational knowledge, because of this information that my grandmother had given me and everything I had learned from, fellow bead workers. um, I found that I needed to have a real deep connection to the material that I was working with. And so bringing fabric with me and beadwork with me, it took me a few years to really settle into what I needed to do. And so this piece right here, Conjured Topography, is the second version of 2 other larger pieces I was commissioned to do for the Kansas City Museum. And those 2 pieces at the Kansas City Museum were really pivotal in how I started approaching these materials, and um, really trying to bring in these values that are really heavy in our own communities. So, like giving, we have a lot of during powwows or just other events, people will give a lot. Having a giveaway is like a really huge thing in our communities. It's a way to show other people how you honor them. And so beadwork is really a big part of that. Like, women spend years making regalia and then gifting it to their family members. And it really is a way to show how you are honoring another person, because the material in itself isn't like, it isn't very expensive, but it's the time and intention that you put behind what you're making, especially the time, because it's a very laborious skill. So yeah, I wanted to bring forth that value in my work, and I'm very, how do I say, like, conscious of like how we relate to our surroundings, and wanting to be very conscious about what our connection is to the land that we inhabit, and also how we view other parts of nature. And so that's why I had chosen this piece of wood right here. It was a way of like working towards honoring tree life, because it's, trees are super important. um, and yeah, this piece of wood that I got was from a scrapyard. So I love doing reclaimed items, which takes me into my gas mask. um, I was doing a project, and this gas mask actually had come out of the very beginning of the pandemic. I was supposed to be going to Santa Fe to do a residency. I'd already been chosen, and then the pandemic hit, so I had to do it virtually. So I was like making this gas mask in my living room, and my kids were at home, and my husband was at home. Everybody was at home. And it was at that point where we really didn't know what was happening during that pandemic. And so we were like wiping our groceries off, and everybody had masks on, and I was really affected by that. But then also this kind of leans into, also my husband is a writer, and as we were traveling through Oklahoma, he was telling me a story about this imagined future that he was talking about making a short story about. um and and he was thinking about this future where, it was so far into the future that those wind turbines weren't even working anymore. And so I started visualizing all these things. But it's really about, this gas mask is really about how we learn skills, and how those skills play into identity, but also how we express, our person in this world, because we use, a lot of cultures, use certain types of regalia to show who they are. And so when I was making this, and I had also went and reclaimed a lot of SSD cards that come from computer motherboards, and I made a breastplate out of those. I was thinking about like how we take these traditional teachings and apply them to what we're doing now, but also thinking about this future, but where we're going, because I'm thinking about what type of world we're leaving for our kids. And that really came out of an experience too, also of going to Cahokia by St. Louis, and, taking our kids to go see this, like, these remnants of this old, civilization. And then just about 2 miles down the road, there was this huge landfill that was actually taller than the Cahokia Mound. And that really affected me, because I was thinking, like, this is what we're leaving our kids. What are they going to do with the teachings that we pass down to them? And what are their grandkids and grandkids going to do with this information? And, like, how are they going to apply it to their present world? And so, this gas mask is really made up of all different parts, where I'm using traditional skills, but I'm also applying it to something that's, like, seems very futuristic, but it is, because then also, like, pandemics probably won't go away, and that is going to be in our future. I was also thinking about what a medicine person would do in this imagined future and how they would adorn themselves. So that was also, like, a part of my thought process. And I really wanted to connect it to the land. So I used Oklahoma red dirt and in part of the creating of that mask too, and beeswax and smoked hide. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was, when we started to get the submissions for New Worlds and we saw this work, I mean, it just resonated with us so much, particularly in this pandemic, post-pandemic, this idea of masks. I think we have a different relationship with this concept of the mask since those years, and it resonates in all kinds of ways for us. So you talked a little bit about the different associations of the mask. Is this supposed to indicate an ominous future, or is it
maybe it's like a warning from the future to now, like, if we don't change our ways, this could be the possible future.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because again, that goes with April's idea that we're not just looking in one direction, could be looking back and trying to mend our ways, change our ways, to have a better future, perhaps. We have to talk about the labor that you mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
And what it takes for you to create a work like this, which is a large work, and apply all of this beading. I mean, can you walk us through how long does it take? What is your process like?
Yeah.
Is this cathartic and therapeutic for you? Are you working out something when you do this? Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah. So in my practice of beadworking, like doing traditional skill, working, my grandmother had taught me to, so when you're creating a beaded piece of work, um, your intention has to be very, I'm not going to say pure, nobody's pure, but, like, very good, because the way that we see objects and the things that we hold close to our bodies need to have good intentions behind them. So she always had taught me that, like, I needed to pray while I was beading, so that anything that I had gifted to somebody would carry my good intentions with them too. And so, this method and this practice that I've kind of fallen upon, I really went big when I first did the two first pieces, which I titled Haho, which means thank you. That's at the Kansas City Museum. I did a lot of research prior to beginning this work and how other bead artists that I admired were applying the work. There is cultural ways that people are applying beads, and then there's also these contemporary ways. And I wanted to find something that I resonated with. And so I did a lot of research, and I had kind of fallen upon this method by the Huichol people in Mexico, where they're applying beads to beeswax. And the beeswax is like this mixture of resins and like petroleum jelly, but they apply the beads sideways, so you actually see the hole, and they do all these beautiful designs, and it's beautifully colored. And that really stuck with me, because those items were also created for a ceremony too. And now, they've kind of expanded, as is a lot of different cultural, arts have expanded to these more modern versions of what we recognize today. So when I started this process, I was intentionally working towards giving thanks to this tree life. And then as I started beginning work on this piece, I started to really come to this realization that it felt sedimentary, like sediments of experience. And I was seeing how things were growing. But this work that I do, I don't often know I don't even know where it will begin. I certainly don't know where it's going to end. It's just bead by layer, things start to build off of each other. And I'm also trying to not necessarily mirror what's happening with the wood, because there's so much beautiful things happening within that wood and the grain. But it is like a conversation, and how I'm working with it and vibing off of it and having a conversation. And so each layers are built. When I first begin the piece, it's like I glue it down to plywood, and then I add the beeswax, and then I start to sculpt the beeswax in different ways. I'm just kind of seeing what's happening within the wood, and working off of that. And then the last bit is applying the beadwork. So that's a whole other and it really is. I work on the ground in my studio, like I have a comfortable chair, but I also think about what the my ancestors, how they used to work too. The women in my tribe would work from the ground, and it's very grounding, like it's connecting, and I feel connected to them when I'm working as well. And so building these layers, it is meditative, but it's also very intuitive. I kind of have to see where I had come from to where I need to go, and how I'm applying them and which directions I want to go to. So I have to kind of think ahead, but also think about the past. And so, yeah, I have like a little studio heater that I got from like Walmart, and I just kind of shoot it towards the beeswax that I want to work at. So there's like a section, and it warms the wax up just enough to where I can start embedding the beads in there, and using a blowtorch. There's all different types of things. And then when I kind of get to the finale, the end, I just jigsaw everything short, and then I get a Dremel and I cut everything really close, because I love the organic shapes, and I love to, how they kind of evolved on their own. And it is meditative, and I have a lot of time to think about my experiences kind of traveling the country, and in my growing up, we did a lot of traveling, and I've been all over the country, and bringing those experiences with me and then embedding it into the work that I'm doing that's an abstraction in a way, and letting it speak for itself, like kind of letting that take over.
So I know people will be wondering how many beads are in this work, and how long did it take you from start to finish to make conjured topography?
Start to finish, I believe it took me about a month and a half, and I have really wild studio hours because my family, my kids, everything, all that comes first. So some days I'll be able to work 4 hours, some days it's 10 to 12. It just kind of depends on what's happening in the household. But this took me a month and a half, and I was hustling. So I was like chopping all the fat off of my schedule and being like, this is all I need to do. As for the bead count, I have no idea. I over order all my beads. And then I love, half of those I got from a rummage. Somebody had like an estate sale, and they had all these baskets of beads, and it was so awesome, and I was so excited, and I have too huge of a collection.
Where artists source their materials is always really intriguing and fascinating for me. So I'm going to then move to SHAN Wallace, who also deals with ideas of community and history, and is our Mid-Atlantic artist, our artist from our Mid-Atlantic region. So SHAN is inspired by the day-to-day occurrences of her surroundings in Baltimore. She uses photography, collage, and on-site installations to demonstrate the cultural and political narratives of Black life, confronting oppressive politics and histories within communities of the African diaspora. SHAN is in the process of creating this new work for New Worlds, which is this large-scale collage titled Pale Blue, a Gun. So with that, SHAN, take it away.
Thank you all for being here. And it's really nice to put a face to the artists, and I'm really looking forward to the show. So I am an image maker. I work in photography, video art. I make analog images, moving images, any way to kind of make an image, I do. And the collage work is just a extension of the photography image work that I do. I use my own photographs to make my collages, which is really a special detail in my process because there's some continuity between the sitters and my subjectivity and then my collage work. And so this piece here is new. It's a piece that I've been contemplating and thinking about and working on for maybe the last 8 months. Um, and it's a combination of a lot of things. It's a combination of just my my fairly new practice into like hoodoo and the title of it is Pale Blue Igun. And when we think about Igun, we think about Ifa, the West African religion. And so it's a combination of religion and practices, spiritual practices and beliefs. And a large part of it also is the dreams that I have. I'm a really big dreamer. And so a lot of my dreams are communicating with my own ancestors, communicating with ancestors of my loved ones, receiving messages, receiving visions and images. And so it's a combination of a lot of things. And it's a new work that I'm actually still working on. When this call is over, I will be getting back to the piece, but it's been leading me. It's, you have an idea of what you're going to do, and you have to send in the blueprints and the drawings and things. And then once you actually start, it all changes. And every day it's something new that's being added. There's contemplation, there's thinking really hard. I'm printing my own photographs. So the process really is printing the images, cutting them, healing my hands from the paper cuts, of course, and then pasting and just arranging. I'm using my hands a lot, and it's a lot of labor because just like Mona, I work on the floor, and so it's a lot of bending and a lot of being comfortable on the floor. Um, but this piece it's taken a lot out of me, but it's also been very rewarding because I've been able to, in a lot of ways, speak to my ancestors about this piece. Like I at one point was having a hard time trying to work on it, and I had a dream and I got a reading, and they were like, just drink some mint tea, drink mint tea, and when you shower, use some mint. And I did that, and I've been doing it consistently. And it's my vision for this piece, and our vision for this piece really has been very clear, which has been really beautiful. And so when I'm thinking about this piece, I'm thinking about just the relationship I have with my ancestors and how they come up to me in dreams, and just really about spirit. And when I think about new worlds, I'm really thinking about a lot of things. I'm thinking about utopia, and utopia as a ongoing transition, not as a destination. When I think about this piece, it's not just a destination. It's a place where I am and where I'll continue to be and continue to build on and think about and exist in. And I'm thinking about also just like this newer way of being, and how, maybe when we transition, or maybe when we go to the dream world, or maybe when we're in the spirit world, or if we're working with magic or in any sort, how our spirit grows and how our spirit becomes different and how our spirit takes on a new being. And so it's a combination of a lot of things, but it is a piece that I've never collaged something by hand this large. And so there have been a lot of mistakes and a lot of layers on top of layers. So like we'll see the full piece, but there's a bunch of other stories under the piece that we see, a bunch of drawings and a bunch of figures made that didn't work. And so that's a beautiful part about it too. It feels very multifaceted. It feels very layered. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the size, I mean, I put down here that it's a detail, but I mean, this is 76 inches high, tall, 100 inches wide. So can you talk us through like the different components of the work? Because this is enormous, what you're working.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's this piece here is it it's just a detail, but for the most part, these details are true to a part of the piece. Um, and so everything, so my process really is I look at a bunch of my photographs for a few hours, or maybe I have in my head what worked, or maybe a dream has shown me something that I might have. Or if I don't have it, I either have to draw it out. But I primarily work with paper. I love paper. Paper is so flexible to me. You could kind of do whatever you want with paper. You could cut it however you like. I'm not much of a, I can't really draw that well, but I can draw enough to make a figure or make something out of paper. And so the process is looking at photographs and then printing them. There's a lot of mistakes with sizing them the proper way. And so I have to resize and then reprint and then cut and then just really arrange them. And so the pieces here, and so when I'm thinking about this piece, there's a lot of it's very abstract for me, and I usually work very narrative. But it's very abstract, and it has a lot of just other materials involved. Like there's charcoal, there's paints, there's obviously paper, but there's pencil. And so I've been able to really use other tools to kind of like express where I'm trying to go. And then the other details of it is just, it feels very in line with just the magic that practitioners engage in, using cards as a way to like read your future or your destiny, or using cards as a way to receive information from spirits about a particular question or thing that you have, and using dice and numbers. And it just it has a I guess an undertone too of death, and my imagination and my own personal relationship to it. I have a great amount of experience with being, I have a good amount of experience with family members passing and transitioning since I was a young person. So that's always been a part of my life, just processing death and trying to understand it, and being in community with folks who like are death doulas and like are teaching me and reteaching me like what that means, and how to reframe my own ideas and connections to death. And so this piece it's been healing in a lot of ways, but it's also just been a combination of where I am, just as someone who is interested in Ifa as a West African religion, but also like a practitioner of hoodoo and a practitioner of um, using nature and using tools to really understand my own spiritual practice and communicate with spirits and ancestors.
I mean, I completely, this is such a learning experience for me. This is the first time I'm hearing of your sort of spiritual process, which is also your artistic process, and how you go about creating the artwork. And I think that dovetails really well with Nicki Green's work, because actually I didn't realize that there would be so many kind of common threads of spirituality in this roundtable, in this panel discussion, because Nicki Green's work is also about spirituality, and one's faith, and how that plays into gender identity, and the artistic process. So Nicki is our artist from Northern California, works primarily in clay. Her sculptures explore topics of history, preservation, ornamentation, and aesthetics of otherness. In her ceramic sculptures like the two that will be featured in New Worlds, Nicki explores the cross-currents of gender, identity, and spirituality. In these works, she draws from the rituals of her Jewish faith and explores their intersections with transgender and queer histories and cultural practices. So Nicki, if you want to tell us a little bit more about these two works that will be in New Worlds.
Sure. Thank you so much. And it's so sweet to be here in conversation with these amazing artists. So the pieces in New Worlds I made at the John Michael Kohler arts industry residency. So this is, for folks who don't know, a residency program that has been happening since the 70s at the Kohler plumbing appliance factory in rural Wisconsin. And I had been thinking and sort of dreaming about this residency while also being quite nervous to sort of go out to the woods to make work about transness. It felt a little precarious, but the folks there took really kind of amazing care of me. And I had previously and continue to make work that is sort of centering ritual bathing as a subject, but also a kind of I guess, a sort of centered object space kind of architecture and really ritual practice, and primarily from my own experience with Jewish religion and ritual practice. I've been trying to make ritual baths that are intentionally acknowledging or maybe even pushing against the fact that trans bodies are considered sort of irrelevant to like a normative, like Jewish kind of binary, gendered, and heterosexual life, and therefore separated and excluded from ritual bathing and most rituals involving the body, and finding ways to make ritual baths that don't just sort of acknowledge transness, but sort of center it. And then in so much ritual bathing, there is a inherent relationship to kind of pure, impure kind of politics. And I'm trying to think about these pieces as considering the trans body as not impure, but actually just inherently pure, and that the bathing that's happening is sort of sloughing off the violence of living in a world that sort of targets trans bodies. So trying to sort of manipulate also the kind of purpose of ritual bathing as well as like the forms themselves. So when I went to Kohler, I had been thinking a lot about how the design, the kind of fabrication, and really the development of contemporary bathroom furniture and architecture is designed in mind to separate, isolate, oppress bodies, and really kind of force this relationship to pure, impure dichotomies. The histories of bathrooms and bathroom design is also linked really deeply in sort of racist dynamics to the way that bodies move through space and are sort of perceived. And so there's a lot of, I think, weight to touching and manipulating the material of the bathroom. And so when I went to Kohler, this was in 2019, I had this kind of excitement about being able to not just engage these appliances, but actually like be able to like cut them apart. And I kept sort of thinking of them or thinking of the work that I was doing as like Frankensteining the bathroom. Frankenstein also having this kind of interesting link to transness and bodily autonomy. So there was all of this kind of richness in just kind of being there and exploring the material process. And what I ended up making in the 3 months that I was there were these sort of wash basins that are Frankensteinian or really like kind of collaging Kohler appliance waste, and then using the forms as vehicles for surface painting that engages, documents, and compiles both sort of like narrative image, but also kind of symbology that is considering queerness and transness as this kind of divine way of moving through the world and sort of relationship to cultural development.
Can you walk us through some of the specific imagery? People may not know what your, what kind of sources you're drawing from in these works.
Sure. Yeah. So I gather a lot of material, and I work with a pretty traditional surface painting technique um, that's often referred to as sort of like tin glazed earthenware, or the kind of Italian iteration is referred to as maiolica, these kind of like blue and white traditions, which are like in and of themselves, I think, these kind of fascinating histories in relationship to the movement and spread of materials, objects, material knowledges, but also relationships to illusion, mimesis, colonization, these like really kind of, I think, weighty topics, all kind of housed in these histories of painting on ceramic objects. So in that sense, part of the image transfer or sort of surface painting process is mapping out the images on paper and then using this technique called pounce, where you're perforating that paper to then push graphite through it onto the surface of the object to then ink it in place. So I collect these pounce transfers over time and then can use them and really like kind of piece together the composition on the forms. The one we're looking at here has what I think of as sort of a reference to the alchemical androgyne, which is this kind of sacred, most like divine and enlightened, bigendered and sort of mirrored body. And they are on the left side of the screen, or the left side of the piece here, like scooping water, and on the right side pouring water, and this kind of circularity of what I think of as kind of information gathering and dispersing. The central image is the washing of feet, and the idea of kind of bodily purity. And then it's kind of tucked under in the image, but there's these kind of centered images of ears, hands, and feet, which are in a kind of biblical description, the ways in which temple priests anoint their bodies with, or really anoint each other's bodies with sacred oils. So the earlobe, the thumb, and the big toe as being representative of the entire body, these kind of contact points with sacred oils. Yeah, and then, like there's like fungus sort of in this composition as well, which is a big part of a big sort of interest of mine, has been for a while, sort of conceptually thinking about fungus as this, and mycology as this kind of study of fungus, which in my work is this kind of materialized queerness, this kind of abject, and also kind of beautiful, fruiting, proliferating organism that consumes decomposing material and kind of grows wildly. So there's a lot of density to the surfaces here, but I feel like also that density is part of why I find this technique of surface painting so rich. Is there's a lot of area and possibility to fold symbols into each other.
Yeah, this is what happens when I speak to brilliant artists. I lose track of time. And so we have so many questions from um, people in the audience. And I also have a lot of my questions. So in the last sort of remaining minutes, I want to be able to um, say some comments and ask some questions. Let's see. And Grace, help me out if I miss a question and you see one. Okay, let's see. So Barbara Craft asks, any thoughts about privacy versus visibility, or the bath as a site for seclusion versus communal baths, like where people or men used to do business? And this is for Nicki.
Yeah, a lot of thoughts about privacy and visibility. The other image or the other piece in the show um, uh, is a painted image of feet under bathroom stalls. And while I was working at Kohler, I was thinking a lot about gay public bathroom cruising rituals as this kind of complex relationship to both, yeah, visibility, privacy, but also kind of intimacy and violence. Uh, Secrecy and sort of publicness. There's a lot there. I could go on for a long time, but I appreciate you bringing that up. Thanks.
SHAN Wallace says that she feels and sees many parallels between your works with hers, Nicki. And there's a question for SHAN from Diane Pershing. Says, I see the shadow horse behind the main one, so that explains extra legs. What about the third leg on the human one? Is there a symbolism there?
Uh, I think that that figure is supposed to, I guess, like give you the impression that it's supposed to be a human or a spirit or whatever you kind of make it out to be. My intention really was a spirit because I was thinking about my partner is just became an Oshun priestess in Nigeria, and she shared this all of this video and this footage with me. And what happens is during some of these ceremonies, they wear these like costumes, really. They don't show any parts of their bodies, no faces, no, you know, you see nothing, but what you see is the performance of it all. And so a lot of these, like a lot of the things that they're wearing for these rituals are very extravagant. They have a lot of shape, they have these structures, and sometimes that there are humans under them, and sometimes they're spirits. And so I was kind of just thinking about that, like the middle point of that type of ritual, it being a human or it being a spirit, but then also just kind of taking back like the actual like attire part of the ritual and just presenting just my ideal reference of that detail to it being a spirit or a human, but you seeing a physical body and kind of making out whatever kind of speaks to you.
Great. Oh, I wish I could read some of these comments. They're all inquisitive, and there's curiosity about your works, and there's lots of, appreciation for the artists in the chat. But we are at 1 p.m. So I, first of all, want to thank our wonderful, wonderful artists, Nicki Green, April Banks, Mona Cliff, SHAN Wallace, for joining us today in this roundtable. I learned so much. Clearly, I lost track of time just listening to all of you speak. And I'm so glad that people are so interested and invested in the works. New Worlds will open in just a couple of months, so you'll actually get to see these works in person along with 24 other artists. So we're all really excited about that. And with that, I'm just going to turn it back to Grace to close us out.
Sure. So I have just one more minute of thanks to deliver. And again, thank you so much, April, Mona, SHAN, and Nicki, for sharing your visions of new worlds with us today. And thank you, Aureen, for moderating just such a generative, beautiful conversation, just so multifaceted. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank Joy for her language services as well. I also have due thanks to my colleagues at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. It always takes a village to put every single program together. And I want to thank NMWA's outreach committees who partner with our museum on this ambitious exhibition. And in particular, thank you to the leaders and members of the Greater Kansas City Area Committee, the NMWA Advisory Board Mid-Atlantic Committee, the San Francisco Advocacy for NMWA, and the Southern California Committee of NMWA for making it possible for these artists to participate in New Worlds. Well, lastly, thank you to our members who are online. Your support really does, it's the fuel, it's all the nuts and bolts that make our programming and our mission for gender equity in the arts possible, so thank you. I just put in the chat a link to register for our next program in this series. It's going to be another fun one. It's titled New Worlds Technologies, and it's going to take place on Wednesday, March 13th, again from 12 noon to 1 p.m. Eastern. So in that program, we'll have artists discussing technological realities and innovative possibilities in their work, and I hope you will join us then. Thank you all so much again. Take care, be well, and see you next time.
Thank you. Thanks, Grace. Bye, everyone.